Hi everyone, it's Rachel back with the Shades of Orange, and I'm here to do another horror wrap-up, and this is a really strong group of books. We have survival horror, zombies, classics, and some really good graphic novels. I enjoyed pretty much everything I read, and I'm excited to share with you. Hopefully some of these are a little bit more underhyped. All that being said, let's get started. First, I want to talk about Suicide Forest by Jeremy Bates. And this is about a group of teachers that are living and working in Japan teaching English. They decide to go and climb up Mount Fuji. However, they have a change of plans and instead decide to go camping in a forest that is known as Suicide Forest. The forest gets its name because hundreds of people go there to kill themselves every year. And that part of the story is true. It is based off a real forest that is in Japan. And in this story, they of course are warned by their travel guides that this is not a good idea, but they decide to go ahead anyway. And as you would expect, once they actually start camping, things start to go wrong. Now, this is actually a piece of survival horror, and it's been a hot minute since I've read the subgenre, and I'm kind of kicking myself because I forgot how much I enjoy these kinds of stories. Like in these typical ones like The Ruins or The Troop, you have a group of people that aren't necessarily friends, but they have to work together, and you get to see the breakdown of the group dynamics, and you also get that survival aspect in it because the horror comes from multiple places and particularly includes a realistic horror because there is a possible lack of food and water and physical conditions out in the wild that are affecting the health of the group. And I very much was pulled into this story. I did it on audio via Scribd. I'll have a link down below if you want to check out the service. And I was just pulled in because I think the narrator did a really good job of having me engaged, and it was just very easy to get into. The characters were likable and flawed, and they kind of fell into the classic different stereotypes of the survival story, but I really didn't mind. And like with a lot of survival stories, I think that this one works really well for people that don't want a lot of supernatural in their stories because again, the horror also comes from other places. This really plays the lines between, is there something going on in the forest? Is there a presence of all of these dead people, or is it just simply the elements getting to them? And I'm not going to spoil and say which way it goes, but I very much enjoyed that play back and forth, and it was absolutely intense and enjoyable. But while I personally found the story very intense, that was because I got very much pulled into the backstory of the characters. There is a lot of setup in this book, a lot of flashbacks to memories, and so for me, I was pulled into the story, but I know other people have found it slower because there isn't actually a lot of action, especially in the first half of the story. This is, as I mentioned, set in Japan, and I am a sucker for those stories, and you spend a lot of time learning about Japanese culture, which I very much enjoyed. It was perhaps a little bit like an info dump, but I was a sucker for it and just ate it all up. And if you're someone who enjoys survival stories and enjoy a Japanese setting, this is definitely one to check out. I really enjoyed it. I'm not totally sure how I felt about the ending, but overall it was a great read and one I would definitely recommend. Next, I finally read the classic book, The Haunting of Hill House by Shirley Jackson. I have been trying to work through a lot of the classics of the genre, and it's not because I think that you need to read them, but as a horror reviewer, I do find it helpful to have more of an understanding of the history of it all. And of course, Shirley Jackson is one of the most famous female horror authors, and so I did want to check out this book by her. I previously read We've Always Lived in the Castle and just thought it was okay. So I went into this one with somewhat timid expectations. I didn't necessarily think it was going to be a 5-star read, and well, it wasn't. I did this one on audio and I did enjoy the narration for the most part. It's read by a very sweet woman and almost has this cozy grandmother feel. And at the beginning of the story, there is a lot of banter between the characters, and the word I kept wanting to use was just cozy because you have a group of people that are coming to this house. They are brought there by a man who wants to basically investigate whether or not the house is truly haunted, if there's anything supernatural going on. And so he invites a bunch of people to come with him and have that experience shared. While this has the classic setup of a haunted house, I was very disappointed that there wasn't much in terms of creepiness. I think it's just the age of the story, but I found it to be very quiet and just not a lot happened. And at first I liked the banter between the characters, and then it started to grate on me. Particularly the female characters drove me nuts, and I found them just to be really annoying. So not a personal favorite, but keep in mind that I don't think that this is the kind of story that's for me. I'm not a huge fan of that more like gothic haunted house story. So if it sounds up your alley, if it's one you've always meant to read, go ahead, check it out for yourself. Hopefully you'll enjoy it a lot more than I did. Now, moving on to something I enjoyed a lot more, I want to talk about Zombieville by C.V. Hunt. This is a novella about a man working as a mortician, and in his personal life you find out that he is keeping his undead brother alive by feeding him parts of the people that come into his funeral home. This is a very weird and gruesome story that in some ways is about zombies, as you would expect from the title, but in other ways it's much more about the mortician brother, because you find out very early on that he is quite disturbed. He was abused as a child, he is disfigured in his face, and because of his childhood trauma, he's become a bit of a psychotic person, or possibly a sociopath. And the story is partially told from his undead brother's perspective, and we get to see that he just wants to end his life and move on and truly die, but his brother is forcing him to stay alive. And it's a very unique perspective because you get to see him through his brother's eyes, and the story also involves a blind woman who becomes romantically involved with the mortician. Of course, she is blind, so she is unaware of his facial disfigurements at first, and so just gets to know him through his personality. At first, this is a wonderful setup, but things do take a dark turn in this book. And I will say that if you enjoy a story that is dark and gruesome, but also has a lot of emotional depth, this is a very interesting one to pick up. In some ways, it's very sad and definitely deals with some serious subject matter, but at the same time, again, you get some very gruesome moments because you get this man cutting up bodies in his lab and feeding them to his brother. And I'm always a sucker for those body horror moments, so I very much enjoyed those. The ending was perhaps a little bit straightforward and oversimplified, but I still really enjoyed this one and would definitely recommend it to anyone looking for a fast, easy read, again with a lot of emotional depth, and one that just stuck with me a lot more than I thought it would. Finally, I want to briefly mention a graphic novel I read and really enjoyed, and that is Vampironica by Greg and Megan Smallwood. And this is, yes, part of the Archie series. They have a collection of horror stories, and that probably sounds like a really campy idea, but trust me, these stories are all really good. Whenever they come up with a new one, I always check it out. And as you can probably guess from the title, this story is about the teenager Veronica getting turned into a vampire, and I thought it was really well done. It felt very feminist. I liked that the school nerd Dilton actually played a really big role in this and got a lot of respect from the more popular characters. And it was surprisingly scary, fun, engaging, all of those good things. So if you're a fan of the Archie comics, if you're like me and read them growing up, I would definitely recommend checking out the entire horror collection, but this is probably one of the best that they've done, so I would definitely recommend this one. It's a great place to start. And I read it when I was in a little bit of a reading slump, just having a rough day, and it pulled me out of it and just put me in the best mood. So definitely a fun one for you to check out. So that is it for this video. Let me know down below what you think of the books I talked about here, and I want your help. I really want to read more survival horror. I have read some of the really popular ones again, like The Troop and The Ruins, but after reading Suicide Forest, I realized that I definitely need to read more of the subgenre. So if you have a recommendation, leave it down below. I just love reading about the breakdown of a group of people, especially when they're going hungry and thirsty and all that good stuff. That sounds terrible, but you know what I mean. So please consider commenting, and subscribing. I read a lot of horror, thrillers, science fiction, fantasy. Otherwise, I will talk to you again soon. Thanks, Kay. Bye-bye.